Welcome, everyone. Today we're diving into one of the most profound and practical texts in the Norse tradition, the Havamal, or Sayings of the High One. Whether you're new to Norse paganism or have been walking this path for years, these ancient verses offer timeless wisdom that remains remarkably relevant to our modern lives. The Havamal isn't a religious scripture in the way many modern people understand sacred texts. You won't find creation stories or cosmic laws here. Instead, what emerges from these verses is something perhaps more valuable: practical wisdom about how to live honorably, navigate relationships wisely, and develop the kind of character that earns lasting respect in both this life and beyond. So what exactly is the Havamal? Found within the Poetic Edda, it's a collection of poems attributed to Odin himself, offering guidance on everything from hospitality and friendship to magical knowledge and ethical living. The text we know today comes primarily from the Codex Regius, a medieval Icelandic manuscript dated to approximately 1270 CE, though the material it contains is considerably older. Unlike texts from traditions with clear written lineages, the Havamal emerged from an oral culture where wisdom was passed through generations of skalds and storytellers before being committed to parchment during the Christian era. The verses were likely composed between the 9th and 13th centuries, though some elements may date back to earlier Germanic traditions. What makes the Havamal particularly fascinating is its structure. It's not a single cohesive work, but rather a compilation of several distinct sections, each with its own character and focus. The first and largest section contains what scholars call the gnomic poems, practical advice for daily living that covers hospitality, friendship, reputation, and general wisdom about human nature. Here we find famous verses like, "Cattle die, kinsmen die. The self must also die, but reputation never dies for the one who earns it well." Then we have the Lodfafnir poems, a section presenting specific advice addressed to a character named Lodfafnir, with repeated phrases marking each new piece of counsel. This format suggests ritual or formal teaching contexts where wisdom was transmitted in structured ways. There's also a narrative section known as Odin's Examples, which recounts Odin's quest for the mead of poetry, using his own experiences to illustrate both the costs and benefits of pursuing wisdom, along with the sometimes morally ambiguous methods such quests might require. Perhaps the most mystical section is the Runatal, which describes Odin's self-sacrifice on the World Tree to obtain runic knowledge. This powerful account of initiation through ordeal reveals Norse understandings of how deepest wisdom comes through transformation rather than mere information. Finally, the Ljodatal catalogues 18 magical spells or enchantments Odin claims to know, offering a glimpse into Norse magical traditions and the relationship between practical wisdom and supernatural knowledge. What strikes me most about the Havamal is how it reveals a culture that prized practical wisdom over abstract philosophy, measured reciprocity in social relationships, personal reputation built through consistent action, and balance in all things. Unlike prescriptive religious texts that issue commandments, the Havamal offers observations about consequences. What happens when people act in certain ways? Let's look at some examples that demonstrate the practical nature of this wisdom. The Havamal begins with advice about entering unfamiliar places. All the doorways, before one enters, should be looked around, should be spied out, for it can't be known for certain where enemies are sitting in the hall ahead. This reflects the reality of a society where safety was never guaranteed, but it speaks just as clearly to modern practitioners about mindfulness when entering new situations or communities. Or consider this advice about friendship. To his friend a man should be a friend and repay gifts with gifts. Laughter. Men should accept, with laughter, but return deception for a lie. Here we see the value placed on reciprocity in relationships, matching openness with openness, while maintaining appropriate boundaries with those who prove untrustworthy. What about this gem on moderation? Moderately wise a man ought to be, never too wise. For those men have the best sort of life who know a fair amount. This challenges our modern assumption that more knowledge is always better, suggesting instead that balance serves us better than extremes in wisdom seeking. One of my favorite verses addresses the distributed nature of wisdom. Of small sands, of small seas, small are the minds of men. Thus all men aren't equally wise. Half wise, half not, everywhere. This humbling observation reminds us that no single person possesses complete knowledge. Wisdom exists across community rather than residing fully in any individual. For those interested in exploring these teachings more deeply, I've created a resource called The Practical Havamal, the High One's Teachings for Modern Norse Pagans, available now on Amazon. In it, I've translated all 164 stanzas into accessible language while providing practical explanations that connect each verse to both its historical context and potential modern applications. What I've tried to capture in that book, and what I want to emphasize here, is that the Havamal isn't just a historical artifact. It represents a living tradition that continues to offer guidance, challenge, and inspiration to those walking Norse spiritual paths today. The true value of the Havamal lies not in perfect preservation or scholarly analysis, but in thoughtful application to lived experience. These verses were never intended to gather dust in sacred halls or remain confined to ritual recitation. They were practical wisdom for navigating a complex world, advice that emerged from generations of hard-won experience. Throughout the Havamal, we encounter not just answers but questions. Do you know how to carve? Do you know how to interpret? These questions remind us that Norse tradition values active engagement rather than passive reception. The tradition asks us to develop skills, to test knowledge, to apply wisdom rather than simply collect it. In engaging with ancestral wisdom, we honor our spiritual heritage most authentically when we neither dismiss it as primitive nor romanticize it as perfect. The Havamal emerges from a specific historical context with both profound insights and cultural limitations. Some verses reflect biases of their time, while others offer timeless observations about human nature that remain strikingly relevant. Modern Norse practitioners demonstrate respect for tradition not by attempting to recreate the past exactly as it was, an impossible task, but by discerning which elements carry enduring wisdom while adapting others to contemporary understanding. This requires both knowledge of historical context and clarity about our own values. I'd like to close with a thought about how the Havamal invites us into an unfinished conversation. These verses weren't intended as the final word on wisdom, but as contributions to an ongoing dialogue across generations. When we practice thoughtful hospitality, develop resilient self-reliance alongside genuine community connection, speak with both honesty and care, and maintain appropriate boundaries while cultivating meaningful relationships, we express the living essence of these teachings more authentically than any memorized recitation. In the spirit of the Havamal itself, I'll conclude with its own wisdom. Now the High One's song is recited in the High One's hall, very useful to humans, quite useless to others. Luck to him who recited it. Luck to him who knows it. May he benefit who learned it. Luck to those who listened. Thank you for joining me today in exploring this profound source of Norse wisdom. Until next time, may the High One's teachings guide your path.